Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald View Park Oxidized Brass wins an award for the longest name in history of inks. But it is a black ink. And to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a cross Bailey with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. But before we go to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, and I immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. Now, the first thing that strikes me, and I don't go out of my way, it's one of the reasons I don't try to match inks. I've tested enough that I really think I could find inks that are almost exactly the same. This chromatography I feel like I've seen before. But I see a light green that works its way up. I see it turn into a kind of purple, so that's great. That green and purple making the black especially dark, at least as its potential. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water, and we see that a lot of that green and purple really sticks around at the bottom. It becomes much more permanent there. We see a little bit of the green push up, and then some of the purple at the top. Makes me feel this ink might have a little bit of resistance to it. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it does not like being reactivated. It feathers and spreads all over the place, and part of the second H becomes a bit blurry. That to me becomes the I don't want to use this in a note-taking situation when I need to highlight. I don't highlight a lot in my notes, but I always feel that it's a good point to have in here. Now, water reactivates some and pulls some off the page, but not a lot. It really only pulls what looks like the top layers of some of that ink off. Most of it is still there. Pen Flush does a bit more than water did. It leaves some of the, the lesser inks and dyes on the bottom where it's kind of that grayish green that's left behind, but there's a lot left behind there. It makes me worry about what it might do, so I would test it in an inexpensive pen before putting it into your M1000, just as an idea. Now, bleach very much removes it from the page, but leaves this kind of tan behind. So that tan is fighting against the bleach, and very well, I might say. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald View Park Oxidized Brass, what a name, has a viscosity of 1.34, which is really, really a wet ink. That's probably what helps it look so dark in its writing, is that so much goes down. To find my dry times, I average my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald View Park Oxidized Brass has an average dry time of 14 seconds. When considering how wet and how much ink goes down, that's pretty good that it brings it right up into normal, despite putting so much ink on the page. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. And with all Birmingham pens, I have to throw this warning out before I actually get to the writing sample. Please make sure that you have an extremely ink-safe area to open these up because they splatter like crazy. Don't use a large nib to get ink out of here. In order to get ink out of here, I have to put the converter directly to the bottle. I can't put the pen into the bottle because after the first time you get half a converter of ink, you can't get any more. Yeah, I like that they tried something. Good initiative. Bad judgment. Clairefontaine has no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer up a bunch of shading with the 1.1. I see quite a bit through a bunch of words. It's supposed to be a black ink. I give it a little bit of leeway because it's an oxidized brass black. So I give it a little bit of leeway with that. Yeah. The extra fine, noticeably darker tone than the 1.1. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It is giving up little bits of color variation like in the and in jumps and in over. Not all over the place, not very consistent, but when it is there, it's nice. And you don't get a lot of shading in black ink. That's a thing you normally don't get. I don't normally even go for shading in my black ink. I want my black to be black. But I think it looks nice here. 7 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone again. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shading. I don't know how long it took to dry because I forgot to write it down. The scrubby of the extra fine shows us some color variation, and we did get color variation with the extra fine. The medium shows us none, and we didn't get any with the medium. The smear test says we could likely recover it if we did smear it. And so, like, I scratched out the on the medium because I was just reminding myself that I had basically opened the bottle up and it was near this paper and I got a good splatter right there. So I scratched it all out so that it didn't look like something happened in the writing. Watch out for those little bottles, really. Tomoe River, no bleeding. Yes, we get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It wants to give you some shading. Like you see spots where it wants to have a little bit, but then it doesn't. The top or the O into the X, it looks like it wants to. I'm sure if I threw it under a microscope I could see it, but it's not really there. It's a neat looking gray there. It's got a gray and a hint of some other color. I want to say a hint of it, like an older blue-black hint and color there. It's very nice. It's a very nice color. We go to the extra fine. It becomes a noticeably darker tone. We get no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We get no shading here. It takes 12 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone again, with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 23 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows us no color variation, and we didn't get any color variation. Oh, I'm sorry, the smear test. That's because I couldn't read it. Because you don't get to recover your smear on Tomoe River. If you make a mistake, that's it. Rhodia, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading. And it's weird because this is, it's a different paper than Clairefontaine. It's the same company. You would wonder if the coating is kind of the same. I don't think it is. The coating of this paper on some inks just does away with some of those shading abilities. It looks like the same tone for the extra fine as what we're getting with the 1.1, which is pretty neat. It looks like it might be a little darker in the 1.1, but I think that's a thing with my eye. It's just a human eye thing because it's thicker. It looks like there's more of it, where here it's very thin, and that being thicker can make it feel like it is darker. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shading at all. 9 seconds to dry. It's a medium dark black here. It gets to be a very dark black when we look at the medium. Noticeably darker tone than the extra fine. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 17 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us we're not getting any color variation, and we didn't. The smear test says you could likely recover it if you did smear it. So I look at this on the G-Lalo paper. It's like a gray toned laid paper. It has no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, and it's unpleasant on this paper. I find it unpleasant on this paper. Extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, 6 seconds to dry. It's the same unpleasant tone as the 1.1. The medium, noticeably darker tone with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. The smear test, oh, excuse me. The smear test says you could likely recover it if you did smear. It's the thing about being entirely on your own. You just sneeze off to the side. You don't have to worry about sneezing all over somebody when you are there all alone. So I went and I checked Apica paper. This is the Apica CD notebook. This is some of my favorite papers. I just think they write fantastic. They feel very nice. They feel like soft, but they don't feel soft to write on. It's kind of, if you haven't tried it, get a notebook just to feel it. Just to feel it. Oh, nice. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It has moments of shading. We see it get darker on the H, darker on the K, darker O to X, darker D, darker Z, E to D, the B. So it's very nice with the 1.1, the shading. Noticeably darker tone when we get to the extra fine. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading. And 5 seconds to dry. Now this paper doesn't normally take forever to dry. It actually tends to absorb it a little bit faster because it doesn't have some of that same coating that those other papers do. But it is not a white. It's an off-white. It is a cream color. That's what it is. It's a cream color. The medium, a noticeably darker tone with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us we're not going to get any color variation. We didn't get any color variation. The smear test says you could likely recover it. Look at that. The scrubby doesn't even come through. Actually, the reason I don't use this to take all my notes and I use the Rhodia is because there was a bunch of inks that if they're aggressive, if you have an aggressive ink and a wet pen, it goes through this. So while it performs great on a ton of inks, aggressive inks, wet pen eats it. So I like to play around with different papers, and I just said I have a whole ream of tracing paper that I use for working on things. So I said, hey, why not? Tracing paper gets no bleeding. Of course it has ghosting. It's a tracing paper. You're supposed to see through it. The 1.1, it has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It gives me shading. I'm getting shading on tracing paper with a 1.1. Nice. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. I'm getting shading. The K is noticeably darker than the C. The Q is noticeably darker than the U. The B and R is noticeably darker than the O. The top of the F is noticeably darker than the bottom of the F. It's really very funny because it's tracing paper and I'm getting shading. 8 seconds to dry. The medium is a noticeably darker tone. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, but the extra fine, we did get color variation in the writing. The smear test, you could likely recover this if you did smear while you were working on this. And that's all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald View Park Oxidized Brass, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Krishna's Ghat Green because it's a lovely green-brown color. So what do I think of Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald View Park Oxidized Brass? It's a black that reminds me of blue blacks that give a little too much black in them, but it's got that kind of reminding of a blue-black ink, and I do like blue-black inks. I also noticed that I only get shading when using fine, dry, or stub nibs. Now this is something to keep in mind if these are qualities that you care about in your inks and your writing. Otherwise, it is a very nice dark ink. Thanks for watching.